Hello, and welcome to the Flipside. This is episode 3. Thank you for joining me. I am your host, Dr. Michael Nichols. I think we have some good information for you today. Should be a fun topic and one that should inform you and enlighten you and make you smarter, I hope. Before we get started with today's information, today's episode, I wanted to mention that I made an error in the last episode. I think I probably said it a couple of times too. I kept referring to Bobby Kennedy's appointment to NIH, and it's not NIH, it's HHS, it's Health and Human Services as the director. So apologize for that. I didn't realize it until after I went back and had already downloaded it onto Spotify and Rumble and all of that, and then realized that I had made that goof. So there you go. So it is HHS. And as I mentioned in the last episode, if you can take just a moment out of your day to write to your congressman and your senators and let them know, we want Bobby to be the head of the HHS. All that fear mongering about him destroying the vaccine program or any else, this other nonsense that the New York Times and other people are saying is so outrageously not true. He wants to improve the research. He wants to improve the studies. He wants to make sure that what is being done is safe. So let's get out there and support him on that. All right. So at the beginning of this and at the end of this, you see an opening for the Flipside, and it's got my website on it's doctor spelled out. And so if you go to that, it's got my link tree, which gives you access to all the different places where you can watch this and keep up with other things that I'm doing. So the Facebook and the Twitter and all of those other things. One thing I want to mention regarding that is that there is now also a email that's on there. So if you wish to send in ideas for topics, I could always use help with that. If you got topics that you think would be fascinating or things you want to ask me about, send in questions, send in, maybe you've even got a case study, other doctors out there, whatever it is. So case studies, questions, ideas, you want to send that to me. I've got an email address on there for you to do that. And we're going to keep making this better and better and better. All right. So here we are. This episode is about something that affects every single person on the planet. Every single person on the planet. There's no one that escapes the topic that we're going to talk about today. Now, whether or not it affects this person greatly or it affects this person in a small way, everyone is going to get affected by this. Most people in profound ways throughout their life. What topic could that possibly be? That topic is stress. Stress affects all of us. Now, some people have do a much better job of handling stress. They do a much better job of letting the stress, wash over them and not affect them in profound ways. And for others, it's like a 1-2 punch to the jaw for stress. It really just knocks them for a loop. And we're going to talk about why there is such a disparity in, a difference, such a huge difference in how people handle stress. And I'm sure you've seen this. Maybe you're one of those people who handle stress really, really well. Like water off a duck's back, they used to say. And it's no big deal for you. But you've got people around you who are falling apart because of stress, health problems, etc. And you may ask yourself, well, their stress doesn't seem as bad as my stress as far as what they're experiencing, but they're handling it a lot worse. There are very specific reasons for that. So we're going to go over that today, and we're going to go over what are the things that stress does to our body. Why is stress so bad? Why does stress affect us the way that it does? Why do we talk about stress as such a big deal? And we'll talk about the brain. We're going to talk about the brain a little bit. We're going to talk about the nervous system. And so I'm going to get to put on my teacher's hat today and really kind of go to town a little bit with this. I'm going to try to keep it basic. I'm not going to try to go too deep into the neurology and those systems. These are systems that I've taught in my teaching career for over 24, 25 years. So I'm very comfortable with this material, but I want to keep it coming at you right here as opposed to going like that. So I'll try to keep it fairly basic, but I want you to have an understanding of what is going on here in the system and the effects of stress. So let's start off by simply saying that, there are different types of stress. The official terminology is eustress versus distress. Now that's eu is spelled EU stress, and then distress, DIS stress. So eustress and distress. Eustress is supposedly the good stress, the good stress, and distress is the bad stress. But it's really not a matter of good or bad so much as it is how the individual's system, what it's doing to the system. Is the stress one of those stressors they talk about, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right? Is it that type of stress? Is it a stress that your body is adapting to and learning from and becoming stronger? That would be an eustress. Or is it a stress that is overwhelming the system and causing the problems that we're going to talk about today that define stress as such a bad thing? That would be the difference between eustress and distress. And all of us have experienced both types in our lives. Some examples of eustress. Exercise can be an excellent example of eustress. Exercise is a stress. You're stressing your body, and that stressing of your body that you're doing with exercise is pushing the body to have to adapt to these stressors, to have to adapt to what it's experiencing, and that forces it to become better. So muscles become stronger, they become bigger and stronger. The cardiovascular, cardiorespiratory systems become more efficient. And those are the things why we say, exercise is so good for us. And that'll make a good episode. We'll do that one of these days too. Squirrel. It's get my ADD going on up there. I get distracted by a thought there. So with these good stressors, another good stressor that you can think about would be school in the sense. So let's say college and learning. And these things can stress. They stress your brain to grow, to learn new material. Learning an instrument could be stress, okay? These are things that make us learn. Now, all of those things could also be reversed. We could talk about exercise as a bad thing. There's people who overdo it with exercise. They're going to the gym 6 to 7 days a week. They go for hours at a time. They're beating up their body and not putting the good nutrition in to help repair the body and enough rest time. Your body needs rest too. It's not just the exercise, it's the recovery as well. If you're not recovering properly, then it can overwhelm the system, and then you can turn a good thing into a bad thing. All of us have experienced stress from learning, from school, from either high school or from college, where you just felt totally overwhelmed. You're staying up all night studying. You're overwhelmed with the material. You're trying to pay bills and study at the same time. Maybe you've got kids too, and the whole juggling, and it becomes a crazy stressor. So there's not one thing that is or isn't, and there is not just one type of stress. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of different types of stressors. And the way we're going to deal with it is going to be different. So let's focus on the distress, because that's the one that we need to be concerned about in the sense of how is it affecting us and what can we do about it? So, excuse me. To start off this conversation, let's look a little bit deeper into your body, and let's talk about the systems that are involved in stress. If we're looking at our nervous system, your nervous system is divided into essentially two parts. It's the central nervous system, which is your brain and your spinal cord, and your peripheral nervous system, which is all of the other parts of the nervous system. The peripheral nervous system involves the somatic nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, and the enteric nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system is further broken down, and it's broken down into sympathetic and parasympathetic. Now, even if you know nothing about anatomy and physiology, you have heard of these before, but you may have heard of them strictly from the nicknames that are given to them. Sympathetic is often referred to as fight or flight. Yeah, exactly. You've heard of that before, fight or flight, okay? And parasympathetic, you may not have heard of its nickname. It's referred to as rest and digest. You can really see the polar opposites there. Fight or flight, aggressive, defensive. It is survival, right? You can really get the feel of that in that name. And then you switch to the other when you say rest and digest, right? If you're ever asked, when does the body heal? The common answer is when you sleep, when you rest. And so parasympathetic is when the body's recovering. It's when the body's healing. It's the digestion and absorption of food. It is all of those things. It's the watering of your eyes. It's the saliva in your mouth. It's the nasal discharges. It's all those weird things. Those are all parasympathetic responses. Sympathetic is more like mobilization. It's getting the armies ready. It's revving up the heart. It's revving up the lungs. It's increasing your access to energy in your body. So through glucose, through blood sugar. And so sympathetic, fight or flight, parasympathetic, rest and digest. And here's another little interesting thing about the two of those things. They do not happen at the same time. They don't really coexist in that sense. There may be some mild overlap, but for the most part, your body's either going to be in sympathetic or it's going to be in parasympathetic. There's not a lot of crossover with that. For example, your digestion is a perfect example of that. And this is a topic that will be revisited when I go over information regarding digestive system issues. We'll do that as a later topic on the flip side. When a person is in sympathetic, so let's say chronic stress, the parasympathetic aspects of the body are being suppressed. It's not that they're turned off entirely, but they're being suppressed. So your digestive system, enzymatic function, motility, etc., for your digestive is being suppressed. You cannot, your digestive system cannot operate the way that it's supposed to, and you cannot have a highly functioning, healthy digestive system if you are in a chronic state of sympathetic all the time. So chronic stress puts you in chronic sympathetic. Following? Okay. So for those who have digestive issues, one of the first things that I would always say to people in our office is we have to start up here. We have to start with what's affecting between the ears here as far as the stress load. Are you in a heightened sympathetic state? If so, we need to lower that sympathetic state to have the parasympathetic function better, more appropriately, and that will help with your digestive issue. There may be other things we have to do too, healing the gut lining, healing the intestinal lining, what have you, but we have to do that as part of the very first thing we do because we have to balance out that system and get the parasympathetic where it needs to be, get it the support it needs to be. So you can kind of see how those two systems work as polar opposites. When you are in a heightened state of stress, your sympathetic becomes the dominant player, okay? Now, before I continue down that road, let's go back for a second and talk central nervous system and look at the brain. So if we were looking at an image of the brain, if you can kind of imagine what the brain looks like, everybody's seen pictures of a brain. The top part of the brain here is the one that looks like it's all folded together. It's got all the grooves in it. Looks almost like a bunch of big, thick, fat worms all put together, right? That's called the cerebrum. It's also sometimes referred to as the seat of intelligence because it's the area where you make conscious decisions. Unconscious decisions are also being processed in that area too, but anything that is conscious is going to be happening in that cerebrum. So the seat of intelligence, because all intelligent thought processes, all conscious intelligent decision making, that's in the cerebrum. It's the largest part of your brain. The next part, which if we were going from cerebrum down, kind of in the middle of the brain, right about here towards the bottom, but in the middle, right in there, is an area called the diencephalon. That area has the thalamic nuclei, the thalamus, the hypothalamus, and the epithalamus are found in that area. At the back of the brain is a piece that where the cerebrum comes back, it doesn't look like it attaches, it's kind of separate. I've always told my students it looks like a big chunk of cauliflower, and it's called the cerebellum. That area is primarily for things like involuntary muscle control, posture, things like that. And then you've got your brainstem coming out of the lower part of the brain, attached close to like the diencephalon area, because it's actually coming right off like the hypothalamus. You've got the brainstem, which is the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. Such cool names in the brain. You've got really good names. Medulla oblongata is a great name, one of my favorite ones. So that's the setup there. Now, why did I go through all of that? Well, because we want to go a little bit deeper into understanding this. There's another area of the brain. It's not considered one of those four main areas: cerebrum, diencephalon, cerebellum, brainstem. That's that area. But there's another area that that exists in the brain. It's not as easily identified, like visually, first glance, as these ones I just mentioned, because it is made from various nuclei in the brain that have interconnected wires connecting them, and it creates a system. We refer to that as the limbic system. The limbic system. Now, that limbic system is also often referred to as the emotional brain. Now you can kind of see we're coming full circle here, right? So you've got the autonomic nervous system, which is part of the peripheral nervous system, which has the sympathetic, parasympathetic. Sympathetic being fight or flight. That's our central character here for our talk about stress. And inside the central nervous system, you've got an area called the limbic system, which is the emotional brain. Also sometimes referred to as the reptilian brain, because it's kind of primitive in its nature and its response. And that limbic system is where all of your emotional responses occur. That limbic system has a bunch of different, like I said, nuclei that are interconnected. The amygdala, which is another fantastic name, amygdala, love that. Think of emotions like fear, okay? The thalamus, one of the thalamic nuclei, memory, planning, some emotional aspects, acts as a relay station for the nervous system. The hypothalamus, which connects to your pituitary gland, okay? The hypothalamus has metabolic aspects like hunger and thirst. It also affects mood. Another one of my favorite names, the basal ganglia. That one also with some emotional things, habits, aspects of habit formation are for the basal ganglia. There are learning aspects to that, some movement aspects to that. Also your hippocampus, another great name, learning and memory. So you've got all of these, and there's other pieces that I left out, but those are some of the main players. You've got all of these nuclei dealing with things like emotions, some metabolic function, memory, learning, habits, behaviors, planning, all connected into that limbic system. Now that's really important to where we're going to go with this conversation, because when we talk about chronic stress, there are the easy things that are right there on the surface of our attention that we pay attention to all the time, that the medical doctors and other people may talk about these certain things all the time as the regular things, meaning how does chronic stress affect you? Lots of deleterious effects from chronic stress. Let's look at that. Let's look at some of the negative effects of chronic stress. Heart attack. How's that? We'll just start with that one. If you here's something. If you were ever to look at a book on pathology, I've got several here. I got one right here next to me somewhere. Books on pathology, and we're talking books that are about like this thick, medical textbooks, listing all sorts of different types of diseases, pathologies, and those textbooks are not even all of the pathologies that exist. They usually pick all the top ones to talk about, maybe a few obscure ones, but it's not all of it. If you looked at the medical reference book for pathology, that would have all of them. But if you were looking and you were saying, okay, what are the factors involved in these various pathologies? A factor that is involved in almost every pathology in those textbooks is going to be stress. When you start looking at causative agents, when you're going to look at linking factors, stress. Why? Why is stress involved in so many aspects of disease and pathology? Well, there's a whole bunch of reasons. Let's just talk about a couple of the big ones. When you are in chronic stress state, and it's important to say chronic stress state, because once again, all of us get stressed. All of us get stressed from time to time, maybe even every day, but it may not be a lasting thing. It's something that kind of passes and ebbs and flows, and we come in and out of a stress state, and hopefully find balance in a more parasympathetic state on a regular basis, that we're not chronically in that sympathetic chronic stress state. Okay. That's my hope for you, and that's my hope for all of us, that's where we usually are. But for those who are living in chronic stress, in a state of chronic stress, it is affecting adversely multiple organ systems in the body at any given moment. Not only that, chronic stress affects the immune system. It weakens the immune system. It affects lymphocyte development and affects the immune system very adversely. People who are in a chronic state of stress get sick far more often. They get sick more seriously. And above and beyond the more obvious of I'm getting more sick more frequently, even above and beyond that, when you weaken the immune system like that and you affect that lymphocytic function like we were talking about, it affects inflammatory states in your body. Your immune system has a big role in helping keep inflammation down, as well as increasing inflammation when you need it. And so it's the big part of the regulatory for inflammation is in that immune system. When you adversely affect the immune system, inflammatory states for your body are going to be higher. So if you know anything about disease whatsoever, now you might start going, now I might see that. If the overall inflammatory state of the body now is being increased, now you see a connective for increased disease and pathology. Inflammation is a state that when it's done chronically, especially, it can create pathology. So stress increases, inflammation increases, ergo pathologies increasing. So there's a very, very clear pathway there for creating damage, destruction. So we can look at cardiovascular system, meaning the heart and the blood vessels. Stress absolutely has deleterious effects on that. Respiratory function, deleterious effects on that. Neuroendocrine disorders. The body has very severe neuroendocrine issues with long bouts of chronic stress. And neuroendocrine meaning nervous system is one system. Endocrine system, like hormones, would be the other system. So neuroendocrine. And so you get a lot of that. So like I said, I'm trying to keep from doing too much of a deep dive into the anatomy and physiology aspect of that, but we have to talk about some of that. One of the aspects of chronic stress that I've talked about for many, 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 many years. I gave a big lecture on this topic at the National Mensa Conference long time ago, over a decade ago. It was in Louisville, and I was invited to do a talk there, and it was very well received. And I did a talk on stress, posture, and brain function. And that combination is an intriguing one for me because it goes back into more of what I do as a chiropractor, as a body specialist, the way stress affects posture and how the two of those in turn affect the functioning of your brain. If you wish to have a fully functional brain, a brain that is sharp and on task, those are two factors that will negatively impact your ability to have a brain that is sharp and on task. How does that work? Well, let's talk about that. I think it's a fascinating subject. Stress has, like I said, very intense effects on that limbic system, the emotions. There is damage that occurs with long-term stress. The hippocampus, just as one example, is one of the nuclei that I mentioned earlier that's part of the limbic system. It's one of the connected loop. And damage affecting the hippocampus has been shown clinically to affect learning and memory. And so people with chronic stress, and you may have seen this with people before, older individuals who are under a lot of chronic stress may become very, very forgetful. There is damage that occurs to parts of the brain that affect the ability to learn and the ability of your memory. So when we talk about fully functional brain, you want to have good, sharp recall. You want to be able to remember the things that you do and see, all the things you're trying to learn. You want to be able to have recall of that and be able to know that you're going to learn something that's going to be there. You're going to be able to process it. You're going to have access to it. But with chronic stress, it makes that very, very difficult. There's a little kind of not experiment, but a little thing that I used to do with students. The day of our very first test in class, I would have all the students put their paper and pencils down for a moment. I would say, sit up nice and straight in your chair. All right, what I want you to do is I want you to do two things. The first thing I want you to do is I want you to take your thumbs. So you're going to rotate your thumbs in like this. You can put your arms at the side, rotate the thumbs in. Let the shoulders slump forward. Let your head fall forward. Basically, kind of cave in on yourself. And I want you to sit like that for just a minute. And I would actually time it like a minute. Just sit there like that. And I want you to breathe and think about how you feel. Think about how your breath feels. Think about how the chest feels in your brain in that position. Now, sit up nice and straight. Roll the thumbs out. Let the shoulders come back. Pull the spine up nice and straight. Kind of bring it up through the chest here. Pull and breathe. And now take a few breaths there. And let's hold that for a minute. I want you to once again feel your body, feel your breath, and feel how you are in that position. Now, invariably, all the students would pretty much say the same thing, that in the first posture, they felt more tired. They felt more sluggish. They felt more depressed. They didn't feel as good. In the next posture, the second posture, they felt more energetic. They felt more positive. Their breathing was easier. When you're stressed, you tend to collapse in on yourself. That's one of the most common postural changes with stress. The shoulders slump forward, the head comes forward, everything hunches forward. You close in on the heart chakra, you close in on this area, everything kind of shuts down. That is very typical with stress. So people with chronic stress who have lots of stress over the periods of their life, and it's really devastating for them. And people who have a lowered ability to handle and fight stress. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. This tends to be the posture that becomes dominant for them. Maybe they even start getting that, that hump in the back there because of this hunching forward. You start to feel their energy shutting down. Okay. This person is like this all the time. One of the things that you have to do to try to change all of that is to fix the posture, but you can't fix the posture without also fixing this first, because this is what's creating the posture. So there's this loop, right? There's a catch-22 here. You can't fix this without fixing this, and you can't fix this without fixing this. So you got to have a plan for that. We'll talk more about that as we go. But I wanted to show you how that affects that. So with my students, just to kind of come back to that, and this goes back to the idea of stress affecting learning. I would tell my students that in the midst of the exam, if you start to get stressed and you feel yourself doing that, shutting down, I want you to stop, put your pencil down, sit up nice and straight, roll your shoulders back, take a couple of nice deep breaths here. Tell yourself, I know this information, it's in there somewhere. And then pick up the pencil and go back to it. But don't continue trying to do the test with this posture all crunched down. And I said, and if I see you doing that, I'm going to walk over and tap you on the shoulder and say, sit up. Because it drives the brain into a position where you cannot access the information. It's not going to be accessible. Okay. Stress is like closing a door to the information that you're trying to retrieve. If you're trying to retrieve information back there and you're in sympathetic, you've got a barrier right there. You've got to remove that barrier to be able to access that information. So stress has a really profound impact on learning, on memory, on recall. And so for students, it can be a big curse, and learning how to cope with that is something that all students have to struggle with and work with. Let's go back a little bit to some of the physiology that leads us into this. Kind of go back to where we started again, and then kind of come forward again. There is something in this system that we refer to as the HPA axis. HPA axis, that's the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. And there's actually quite a few of these different axes that we talk about. There's a hypothalamus thyroid axis. There's more. There's a gonad one, but the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, or HPA axis, the most important, arguably the most important axis in our body when it comes to stress. There's a direct relationship between the hypothalamus, which is part of the diencephalon, central nervous system, the pituitary, which connects to the hypothalamus at the very bottom part of our brain, and the adrenal glands, which actually sit on top of the kidneys way down here. There is a connection between those. Your adrenal glands are your primary glands for stress. Your adrenal glands produce cortisol. You may have heard of cortisol. Cortisol is also referred to as the stress hormone. The hypothalamus is part of the limbic system. When you are experiencing emotional stress, when you're feeling stress in your brain, you're experiencing that. The hypothalamus acts on the pituitary to send adrenal corticotropic hormone, ACTH, to the adrenals to produce cortisol. Cortisol is produced as long as it's necessary while you're in a sympathetic state to mobilize, once again, energy for your body to keep you in that fight or flight readiness. Okay. Understand, I said earlier, sympathetic, parasympathetic. Sympathetic takes precedence over parasympathetic. I told you they can't function at the same time. But if you are in sympathetic, your body has a prioritized view for sympathetic, because sympathetic is survival, right? It's fight or flight. You're in fear for your life. You have to survive. The body puts that sympathetic response at a height here above the parasympathetic. So it'll continue to suppress that. Cortisol is the primary hormone for that. Cortisol mobilizes glucose, blood glucose, to make sure that you have the energy necessary to keep yourself in that state of survival. Long time productions of cortisol are part of this whole neuroendocrinology thing that we were talking about in the sense of damage. I wanted to show you a couple of papers. I always like throwing in the papers here just to, show that it's out there. And this is a very, very small sampling. But this first paper that I'm going to show you here, here we are. All right, does stress damage the brain? I mentioned the hippocampus, and as it starts off right at the very beginning with the summary at the top, studies in animals showed that stress results in damage to the hippocampus, a brain area involved in learning and memory with associated memory deficits. MRI imaging showed reduction in volume of hippocampus in both combat veterans and victims of child abuse. In combat veterans, hippocampal volume reduction was correlated with deficits in verbal memory on neuropsychological testing. So, it's interesting. They looked at veterans and victims of child abuse. Why? PTSD, right? Post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder, we're now talking about a type of chronic stress, correct? Post-traumatic stress disorder is kind of like, when you're talking about chronic stress, that's like the ultimate, right? Post-traumatic stress disorder. But it's a type of chronic stress that is very deep-seated with that limbic system. There's a huge emotional component with that. I don't remember if there was something else I had highlighted. Yeah. Once again, just the learning and memory. I think that was it. Another paper, I think, there we go. This was talking about the neurobiological and systemic effects of stress. Stress can cause an imbalance of neural circuitry subserving cognition, decision-making, anxiety, and mood that can increase or decrease expression of those behaviors and behavioral states. The imbalance in turn affects systemic physiology via neuroendocrine, autonomic, immune, and metabolic mediators. What I wanted to point out there is, once again, that cognition. We think about heart disease. We think about, there's even been some talk that it has effects on cancer cells. I don't know if that's been confirmed, but there's talk about that. Respiratory function, vascular integrity, all these things with chronic stress and how it affects that. All that bad stuff. But the stuff that affects us on a more daily basis, the stuff that affects us from the disease standpoint, but still equally as bad, is what it does to the functioning of our brain. There was another piece here I wanted to read. There it is. The social and physical environments get under the skin and shape the brain and body. I loved that line because it's talking about, once again, what's here, the social and physical environments and how they affect this gets under the skin. Okay, it's affecting us, it's affecting our emotions, it's getting into our body to create something, right? From the standpoint of the individual, a major goal should be to try to improve sleep quality and quantity, improve social support, and promote a positive outlook on life, maintain a healthy diet, avoid smoking, and have regular moderate physical exercise activity. Concerning physical activity, it is not necessary to become an extreme athlete, and moderate physical activity has benefits for the brain and the body. A major challenge throughout the life course is to find ways of redirecting future behavior and physiology in more positive and health directions. The reason I wanted to bring that up is because that next part here, this is more easily said than done, this person says. I wanted to point that out because it's we talk about these types of things, and we give advice and say, oh, yeah, you should do this, you should do this. And we make it sound really easy, but changing these things is not always simple. So learning how to affect the way stress affects you is incredibly important but it can also be incredibly challenging for some people as well. So I want to start to kind of bring some of these things together. So we talked about stress being a negative on the different organ systems of the body, how stress is a intimate influencing aspect on almost all pathology that we experience. There can be factors in that. We talked about a little bit here, just briefly, about the different systems, and we talked about how emotion can affect the function of your brain, excluding pathology, just the function of your brain, how intelligent your capabilities are, how well you remember things, how well you create habits and can take care of tasks. Chronic stress can affect that. So for you to not only be a healthier individual, reduce your chances of different pathologies and diseases, but also to be a more highly functioning individual, your ability to handle and process stress is paramount. It is one of the most important things because of how wide-reaching the effects of stress are. Our ability to process, handle, deal with stress is incredibly important. If this was an open conversation, I would ask you, what are the things that you do to help yourself deal with stress? And the list can be huge. A lot of people would say things like take walks in nature. That used to be one of my absolute biggest things. But that was also when I lived in California. Right now I'm in Ohio and it's snow outside on the ground, and not my preference to walk around in that. But when I was in California, especially, I would hike all the time, but if I was feeling stressed, if I was feeling emotional, walking in nature, hiking, doing some rock climbing, that kind of stuff really just brought things home for me, made me feel more connected to myself and my environment. And the physical effort of those things also is important. So not only are you walking around in nature and enjoying that, but just the physical aspect of it is important as well. So learning what works for you in dealing with stress is incredibly important. A point here that I just kind of mentioned that is a big part. When you're talking about stress, exercise has been shown to be as good or better than most medications at handling mild to moderate depression. If it's severe depression, it doesn't help as much. Mild to moderate depression, though, exercise helps incredibly well. Depression and stress are obviously linked, right? So stress can be just a factor that creates the depression. The depression creates a loop that creates more stress, and it becomes a treadmill that's hard to get off of. So what can we do? All right, so we got that. Okay, all right, Doc, thanks. You told me how bad stress is. Stress is horrible. Thank you for telling me. I didn't know that before. Thanks. It is. It's really bad. So what can we do about it? That's probably the biggest thing. What can you do as an individual? There's a lot of things that you can do. A lot of things. Let's talk about some of the more practical physical things, and let's talk about some of the other things you can do as far as dietary and supplement. So physical, we just started talking about that. So exercise. Exercise is probably the number one thing that individuals can do for stress. Regular exercise. Now that exercise doesn't have to be, as that article said, like an elite athlete type of thing. You don't have to go out there and, win a marathon. You don't have to be training 5 days a week and killing yourself. You don't have to do that. If you want to do that, that's great. That's your choice. But what I'm saying is that doesn't have to be the way the exercise works to give you the positive effects. People have talked about steps, just doing steps, getting a step monitor and doing steps, 5 to 10,000 steps a day, somewhere in that neighborhood. There's lots of discussion as to what is the amount of steps that is the right amount of steps. I don't know if the research is really settled on an opinion on that exclusively. I've seen 5,000, I've seen 6,000, I've seen 10,000. Let's say 5 to 10,000 steps in a day. Get a monitor and do the steps. That can be as easy as that if you wish to do that. Does that mean you're getting every aspect of exercise that a person should or could get? No. So know that I understand that, but I'm saying that is one thing that you can do. Going to walks around your neighborhood with your dog, that type of thing, or with your spouse, doing walks in nature, hikes. Those are excellent types of things. Other physical activity, physical exercise, depending on your stress levels, can be even more important. So some type of weight training, swimming, those types of things are really good for stress. Any type of physical exercise is going to give you some kind of benefit, not only for the stress, but of course it goes beyond that. Sleep is really important, but here's the catch-22. If you are in chronic stress, then you lay there in bed with the recorder in your head going blah, 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 and it's hard to get yourself to fall asleep. So that can be tricky. So we'll go over some things that you can do to help yourself relax and get some sleep too. Meditation is a really excellent tool. I cannot count how many people have told me, but I can't do meditation. It's just not for me. I can't do it. I always want to laugh at that kind of a comment because, well, of course you can. You're a human being. You can do meditation. Everybody can do meditation. There's nobody on the planet that technically cannot do meditation. I've had people say, I can't do it. I sit there and I just can't do it. Here is what I consider the biggest problem with people with meditation. They're going into it with an expectation that's not realistic. They're thinking that the goal for meditation is to be like Buddha on the mountain. You're going to sit in lotus position and you're going to suddenly find nirvana, right? Everything's going to go quiet and you're going to connect to your heart rate and your breathing and everything. It's just going to be perfect. And when they can't find that, when they sit down on the floor or they sit in a chair or they sit on the couch and they're going to do their meditation and they can't find that, when what happens is the chatter in their head won't shut up and they can't get it to stop, they feel like they've failed and they say, I can't do this, right? They say, I can't do this because I couldn't get the voices in my head to stop chattering, okay? But that's because their goal is wrong. All right. The goal is not to find silence. The goal is not to find nirvana. Maybe at some point it is, but especially for the beginner in meditation, that's not the point. So for mindfulness meditation, which is the style of meditation that I've done in the past, this is what I tell everybody. So the goal is to be present. That's it. That's the goal. The goal is to be present. So when you do your meditation, number one, set a realistic goal. I'm going to meditate for 5 minutes. Hey, better than nothing, right? Start off with 5 minutes. Work your way up to 10 minutes. Work your way up to 20 minutes, however you want to do it. But start off with something very doable, very realistic, and go into it with the right idea. The chatter in your head is not going to be quiet and it's not going to go away. So this is how you would deal with it. So I'm going to pretend like I'm meditating here and I'll voice out what I'm doing. Okay. So I would assume a comfortable position. Even if I'm in the chair like this, I could just sit here. I don't have to be in lotus position. I don't have to cross my legs and put my hands on my knees. Right. All right. And so the first thing I do is I close my eyes and I start to connect with my breath in my nose, out my mouth. And I'm just connecting on my breathing. And all I'm trying to do is feel what's happening in my body, be present with what's happening in my body, and I'm connecting with the breath. I'm connecting with the breath. I'm connecting with the breath. And when my mind starts to say, oh, we got to get groceries today. Oh, we got to get that milk. We got to get the milk. We got to get the cereal. We got to get the groceries. You continue with your breath, but you also don't try to fight that. Shut up, shut up. I'm not supposed to be thinking of these things. I'm supposed to be quiet. I'm supposed to be peaceful. Don't do that. That fighting of that makes the voice get louder. The voice wants recognition. So you would recognize it. Yes, I do need to go to the grocery store. I need to get some bananas. Go back to breath. And then the voice starts chattering again. That person that cut you off in traffic, they're a jerk. Man, why would they do that? And you're like, yes, that person was a jerk. And you go back to your breath. Okay. But the whole time with meditation is to, number one, don't fight against the voices in your head. Acknowledge the voices in your head. But as soon as you acknowledge the thought, you go back to breath. Acknowledge the thought. Go back to breath. Acknowledge the thought. Go back to breath. And it's going to be like that, especially at the beginning with meditation. The voice will not shut up. But you have to realize that your goal is not to get the voice to shut up. Recognize what the voice is telling you, honor it and accept it, and go back to breath. Recognize, go back to breath. Now, the longer you do meditation, not meaning necessarily the time, 20 minutes to 30 minutes, but the longer in months to years that you have done meditation, the easier it gets to have that voice go silent and have moments of just total peace. But that doesn't happen at first. It never happens at first. Anybody who's ever done meditation long periods of time for a long stretches can attest to that. It doesn't happen. There's no trick. There's no trick to shutting up the voice. You just have to honor it and accept it and then move back to that. Now, you can go online to different sources and find guided meditations, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever, guided meditations where someone has a nice soothing voice and they tell you to do a body scan. Start with your toes. What do you feel? Breathe into your toes, work up to your knees, work up to your hips, your low back, your shoulders, and go through your whole body, experiencing your body. What do you feel? And going through that. Excellent way to help stress because it puts you into the now. There's a great book called The Power of Now. One of my all-time favorite books. Excellent book. I can't remember when it was published. It was probably the late 90s, mid 90s. Eckhart Tolle was the author. If you haven't read Power of Now, I highly recommend it. I think it's a great book. And he mentions in there, and I'm paraphrasing this, that pain comes from either focusing on the future or focusing on the past. That if you're actually in the present moment, that doesn't exist. The pain and the stress are because you're focusing on what might happen or you're focusing on what has happened, not what's happening in the present moment. Now, I won't get into the ins and outs of that, but the idea being is that being present in the moment helps you to connect and ground yourself and not worry about the things that might happen or even the things that did happen, because what did happens in the past. It's not happening to you now. It happened to you then. Let it go, be in the now. That's part of the mindfulness. So meditation is a really strong part. Exercise and meditation. No new information there. Those are things I'm sure you've heard before, and it's very true. Those two are two of the most powerful things we can do for stress. Having community, people that you can talk to and be around, is very important. A loved one or a good friend, people you can talk to. Maybe they can exercise with you or walk with you. Maybe they can even do the meditation with you. But that's an important thing, is having those social networks. This day and age of the cell phones and the computers, we don't connect face to face, eye to eye, hand to hand with people as much as we probably should. And that's something that really helps with that. As far as supplementally, there are excellent supplements for helping you with stress. Now, the things I just mentioned, the exercise and the meditation and the connection things, those are the things that should be done first, and the other things added to that. Supplements are excellent, but the exercise and the meditation stuff are very potent and give health benefits even beyond that. So I've got a whole list of herbs and things that I recommend for people. And there's little bits of variations between them. And I'm not going to try and get into all the variations right now, but I'll just kind of mention a few of the different herbs that work really well for stress. Ashwagandha is one of my favorites. Ashwagandha is an excellent herb for helping with chronic stress, anxiety, things like that. And so I would um, I would recommend ashwagandha strongly, especially if you have chronic stress. Um, Valerian root is another good one. Valerian root is good for helping relax the body and help you sleep as well. It can be a good sleep agent. Kava, you'll hear it sometimes, but kava is another one that can help relax the body and help with getting to sleep. Holy basil is another one, another excellent one for stress. St. John's wort is good, not necessarily as a anxiety or stress from that perspective, but depression. St. John's wort, excellent studies on St. John's wort for mild to moderate depression. Once again, severe depression, not so much, but mild to moderate depression, really good effects. Some of these herbs have deleterious effects with medications. So you do need to be wary of what you're taking. You can look up whether or not there are cross effects with medications to know that, St. John's wort especially. Excellent product, but you have to be wary with certain medications. So make sure that you look up these things before taking them. Take them as recommended. If you have a health professional that's helping you out, mention them. Maybe they can actually help with telling you how much of the dosage, et cetera, or which ones that they prefer. Those are all good, solid herbs for helping with creating a more parasympathetic state in the body, reducing the sympathetic tone of the body so that you can find more harmony and balance. Another little like kind of home remedy that I'll tell you about too, that I think is good for helping with sleep. This is not a sleep pill, so it's not going to knock you out. Okay. What it does, it just helps to relax the body. And that's banana tea. Yeah, banana tea. So take a banana. So let's say you're doing this for one person, one banana for one person. Make sure the banana has no green on it, that the skin has no green on it. Any banana that has green on it is going to be bitter whenever you do this banana tea. So you don't want any green on the skin. I also would do organic bananas for this. Typically, I tell people don't worry about organic bananas. You're eating the meat, you're throwing the skin away. But in this recipe, you're boiling this with the skin. So you want organic, okay? Organic bananas. Organic bananas, no green, okay? Cut off the very tips, throw those away, and then cut it into about 4 or 5 chunks. The chunk is going to be like yay big, okay? This is with the skin attached, cutting it into chunks. Put that into a couple of cups of water, bring it to a roiling boil, and then turn it off and just let it sit in the hot water for about 15 to 20 minutes. Then pour it into a cup, take out the chunks, pour the fluid, the water, into a cup with just a small pinch of cinnamon, and you're good to go. What does it taste like? It tastes like water, tastes like hot water with a little bit of cinnamon in it and a very, very mild banana flavor. Very mild. So it's more like hot water with a very mild banana flavor and that touch of cinnamon. What's happening when you boil the banana like that is through the meat of the banana and through the skin especially, you're getting all those wonderful qualities that bananas are known for, with magnesium and manganese and potassium, et cetera, being drawn out of the banana into the fluid, and then you drink the fluid. So you drink about a cup of this, two cups of that, as like a cup of tea. And like I said, it's not going to knock you out. It doesn't make you just fall asleep. What it does is it just helps to relax the system. Sometimes that's all it takes for you to be able to get rid of those voices at night and be able to go to bed. So you would do that maybe an hour before you go to bed. Okay, so that's another little handy tidbit. So know that chronic stress is something you can't get rid of. I used to joke in seminars that if you went away to a desert island to try and escape all the stressors of your life and you moved on to this desert island, eventually a hurricane's going to come. It's going to knock your hut down. The monkeys are going to steal your coconuts. Something's going to happen to stress you out. Stress is just there. It's part of life. It's never going to be something that you can get away with. I just remembered one part that I was going to talk about. I was starting to wrap things up here, but I'm going to actually go backwards to that. So pardon me for doing this, but I wanted to bring this up. I had mentioned this at the very beginning. Different people are affected by stress differently. Why is that? Okay, so I'm coming full circle back to that. So forget that I just went over the ending part with all the herbs and everything. That was supposed to be at the end. And so there's been lots of studies that have shown that we inherit our ability to handle stress. There's a lot of factors in that. Epigenetics change from generation to generation due to stressors. They did studies with people from the Holocaust. They did people with the potato famine. They did following families. They did lots of studies on agouti mice and showing stress in this generation and how it affects the other generations. And what they've seen is that, let's say your great grandparents went through lots of stress in their life. That is passed down into the kids that they have, your grandparents, and then that's passed down into your parents, and that's passed down into you. And so that can change to the good also. Okay. So the really bad stress can change the epigenetics for someone so that they have a harder time. Their adrenals don't function as well. Their cortisol production and the way their body responds to the cortisol is different. So that they don't handle stress the same way. Their immune system is not as strong and they don't handle stress the same way. That can also change though. So the same family, great grandparents to great grandparents to grandparents, et cetera. Let's say along that way though, that the people learned how to change their stress and they started altering that. That can change epigenetically and make you strong again too in that lineage. So people have different capacities for handling stress, and some of that is based, and it can be a lot depending on what the backstory is on what's happened in their family from, like I said, generationally. You can inherit your ability to handle stress, and that it can be a big reason why some people just don't handle stress well at all, and other people, you wonder if they're ever stressed because of the way that they handle stress. So there's really nothing you can do about that in the sense that, you can't change what your great grandparents did or your grandparents. And so what you get from that genetic makeup is there's nothing you can do about it for yourself in this here, as far as that goes. You can change the way you handle things like we just talked about with sleep and exercise and meditation and herbs and all of these things. You can do those things to help change these things. And then hopefully, if you haven't had kids yet, that is passed on. You've improved it that much more. That gets passed on to the kids that you have. Okay. And hopefully that's the case. And then you can start to change those things. But you can't change that. So you have to accept where you are. You have to accept, that you have your background, whatever it is. This is just how I handle stress, or how my body deals with stress. But then you can start changing the mechanics of that. Okay. You can start changing the mechanics of that. I talked about the posture. I mentioned what I did with my students. You can also use that yourself. Let's say I'm doing a computer job right now. This is me on my computer. This is what I do for a living. Set a timer that at certain intervals, every 20 to 30 minutes or whatever, you take a very, very small break. I mean, your boss may not want you taking big breaks, but a very small break to just sit up straight, roll the shoulders back, take a couple of deep breaths, get the tension out of your shoulders, and just connect to yourself and to what your body wants you to do. And just do that every 20 to 30 minutes, and then go back to doing your computer, and then set up a regular exercise program. Okay. Set up time to connect with friends and family. whether it's having dinner, whether it's sitting and talking, whatever it is. Okay. Start taking some of those herbs to help you with that. All these things work together. I would never say just do only one of those things. I would say do all of those things and then see what kind of great results you can get. It's oftentimes with most things in the natural world, people say, well, I didn't feel like chiropractic worked for me. I went there for 2 weeks and it didn't work for me. Well, number one, 2 weeks of anything is probably not going to work for you. So you got to give things a much better shot at that. And chiropractic's not the end all be all. Acupuncture is not the end all be all. Massage is not the end all be all. Medicine is certainly not the end all be all. So doing just one of these things is probably not going to be the best thing. You want to do combinations of things to the best of your financial and time ability, but combinations of things. And so the same thing with stress, it's combinations of things. So massage can be an excellent effect for stress. Acupuncture can be an excellent thing for stress. Chiropractic can be excellent for stress, especially different techniques that have a greater effect on sympathetic, parasympathetic, like network spinal, formerly network spinal analysis. That's an excellent technique for helping with a stressed out mind, a stressed out body. So these are all different factors that you can use, and I would certainly encourage you to do all of those things. So we're wrapping it up here. I kind of went out of order there towards the end. I apologize for that. I got carried away with a tangent and went with it. But I hope you learned a little bit about stress. I hope you can understand why it's so important to have strategies. Just walking through life with no strategies means that the stress is probably going to end up overwhelming you. So you have to have strategies. You have to say, okay, I acknowledge stress's existence in my life and how it's affecting me. I acknowledge that it is bad to have this continue happening to me. And I acknowledge that I need to do something to help with those effects. What am I going to do? So that's where the plan comes in. I'm going to start exercising. I'm going to do whatever. Okay. And then don't stress about those things. Okay. Now I'm stressed that I can't do the workouts properly. Okay. You got to let go of that. And you got to just say, I'm going to do what I can do. Okay. And not stress about it. So, all right. Wrapping up another episode of the Flipside. I'm having fun. I hope you're having fun too. I hope you're enjoying these episodes and you're getting a lot out of them, because I'm enjoying this process. So that is the end of episode 3. As I mentioned at the very beginning, there is information that's going to come up right after this that's going to show you the website to go to for all of my links and for the email. The email is on that link tree, and I really want to hear from you. You got ideas, you got questions, because what I'd like to do is actually start answering questions on here too, and do a segment where we actually answer questions from people that are writing in. And so bring it on. Okay. I'm here. All right. So that's been the Flip Side. Until next time. Thank you.